Sometimes I do them, make them talk loud. Especially if I'm flash.
Alrighty, we are back in session from executive session. Next item on the agenda, 3A. Discussion regarding ordinances for the regulation of medical and recreational marijuana.
Ken was going to do the presentation, but instead I'm here, Carol Morris, city attorney. What you're going to do tonight, hopefully, is vote on 3 draft ordinances for forwarding to the planning commission.
Actually, this is just the workshop, so we can't vote tonight. We'll be voting next.
Oh, you're not going to, okay, sorry, okay. What you're going to do is think about it, think real hard, and the 3 ordinances that you can choose from that are drafted are number 1 is an ordinance that bans medical marijuana uses. The second one allows recreational marijuana in the industrial zone, light industrial zone. As an alternative, you can ban recreational marijuana uses. And then another alternative is you can come up with your own ordinance and mix and match and decide what you'd like to allow and not allow. So those are the choices. Would you like me to do anything further in this, any additional detail?
I had one question on the recreational side. We're going to place retail in a light industrial zone versus a commercial zone. And I was just wondering the rationale behind that recommendation versus put them in maybe a commercial zone closer to the ingress and egress routes versus having people driving through town and through our industrial complexes.
You could do that. The reason why I've been recommending that in cities is because the city has no idea what adverse or secondary land use impacts will result from these uses. And this isn't like a normal commercial use as far as we can tell from the experience of other cities. I don't know if you've heard about that, but like in Seattle, there were just lines and lines of people going around the block, people lining up to buy it. The state of Washington, when it accepted applications from people to have recreational marijuana licenses, it did not ask for any SEPA environmental checklist, and that's something that they're required to ask for normally, but they didn't ask for it. And when we ask someone to fill out the application for a building permit or a tenant use permit or conditional use permit, we get the environmental checklist, and then it lists all the possible environmental impacts, like the traffic and how much water they're going to use and whatever. Right now, we don't know what the impacts are going to be like. So we thought if you put it into the zone where all these impacts can be absorbed the best, we could try it there, and if it doesn't work out there, if you want to move it to commercial, you can expand it there. You can ban it in that one zone and move it over there. Of course, there's always the issue if someone does locate there, then they might be a legal non-conforming use, but only until, you know, they decide not to stay there anymore, and you can allow them in the commercial zone. But at least we'll get some kind of history on what the uses might be.
Okay.
So yes, you can definitely put it in the commercial zone if you like. Any other questions?
I do. There's actually a couple places, and this is just a quick thing, but it calls out the director may recommend conditioning or denial of conditional use permit. We don't have a director in that department anymore, so I don't know if it would go to the yeah, I know. So something that you work with again, that's your worship. I've just done that. And then the other one I had. If somebody else has a question, please feel free.
My question is, could you use the mic? Thank you.
Is that better?
Uh-huh.
Well, he's looking. If many of the findings
behind the medical ordinance have to do with the essentially total lack of state regulation compared to what the federal government is looking for to avert prosecution.
Right.
If we were to adopt a ban now, and the legislature got its act together in the next session, how quickly would we be able to adapt city code if a suitable system was set up? Is that something that would require a hearing process as we're going through here, or is that something that would be simple council action?
You could do it, I mean, you could hear about the legislature making a change, and then at your next council meeting, you could adopt an interim zoning ordinance that would be effective immediately as long as you had a majority plus one. And then what would happen, excuse me, is an interim zoning ordinance is adopted in the same way as a moratorium. So you just have to have,
Hearing after the fact.
yeah, you have to have that 60-day hearing, and then after that, then you come up with your permanent zoning ordinance. And that's what everyone thought was going to happen in this last legislative session. We were all waiting for the legislature to say, oh, we're going to get rid of medical marijuana, and we're going to make all the people who are medical marijuana qualified patients and designated providers apply for recreational licenses. But they never got it together, and they never did that. That's what we think is going to happen. They're going to combine it so that everybody's under the recreational umbrella, which would then take, state enforcement, state licensing, and have the state be in charge of the conditioning and all that. And then cities, of course, would have still the choice to allow it or not allow it.
I think I'm good. That kind of answers my question.
Okay, any other questions? Okay,
I did have one more.
okay.
So, just to get the recommendation out there, if we chose to allow it, and then later on down the road, after we saw some impacts, and we didn't like the impacts we saw, could we then ban it at a later date?
Yes, but there's the argument that the people who then were in operation would say, we're a legal non-conforming use, so we should be allowed to continue. And then we could address that in the same way that you do other legal non-conforming uses. For instance, I don't know if you can remember, but, cities used to allow billboards, and then they banned them because they're just such an eyesore. And the question is, do you want to ban them so that nobody can put up new billboards, or do you want to ban and also require the existing billboards to be taken down, which is sort of an amortization? And what people did was they put in their codes provisions that would say, okay, figure out how much your billboard's worth, and then we'll give you so many years to amortize that cost. And then once that's amortized, then you have to take the billboard down. So there's a lot of ways to address non-conforming uses. Okay, no other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on that issue?
I think we should allow recreational businesses, and we do need to clean up our business licensing requirements, and it's nice to have a section isolated to just these types of businesses so that it's very clear how these businesses should operate and the processes that they need to go through to get it done. And I think I've already been on the record as stating after the Marijuana Use Advisory Committee, after chairing that committee and finding out all the facts, medical marijuana really stood out as a problem area to me. And I'm all for banning medical marijuana in the town. I mean, and I'm talking growing it in your houses and everything that the state allows, in my opinion, because there's no enforcement action at all. I honestly believe that's where most of the illegal distribution of marijuana that we're seeing is coming from. These poorly written medical marijuana laws. And so I'm all for banning the medical marijuana and going strictly to recreational, because after reading the RCW on the restrictions that the state has in place for these businesses, I think they've dotted every I and crossed every T, and if they do anything wrong, they're done. They get their license revoked, and there's a fine schedule you know, for minor fines, or for minor, issues, and after like the third offense, they're done, you know, and anything major, they're done, and they can't reapply, and they can't, you know, there's no forgiveness once the license is taken away. And I think that, in and of itself, is gonna keep these businesses on track and doing what they're supposed to do, and I believe that, you know, the taxes the state is collecting from these businesses is gonna pay for those enforcement officers to be out there, and there's just more incentive for them to comply than there is for them not to comply.
So, one question about, and I didn't see it in here, Carol, but to the point of business licenses, is there language in here that changes the business license rules for the city? Because even if we pass these as they are, we can't issue business licenses because it's under federal law. So is that verbiage cleaned up in here? I just didn't see it.
No, this is a model ordinance that I drafted for a number of cities, and it only addresses recreational marijuana, and that's it. I didn't go through your business license ordinance to clean that up. One thing I wanted to make, to your point, is that, so that you're aware, the state is issuing the recreational licenses on an annual basis. And then when the person renews, they notify you, just like they do with the first one. They'll notify the city and say, do you have a problem with this license? And then the city has the opportunity to say, we've had problems with this business for the following reasons. And then they'll take that into account, they say, when they determine whether or not the license should issue. So even if you do allow recreational marijuana, there is that process where you will have some input, just like you do with a liquor license.
Any further council discussion? Well, it's council pleasure. Should we move this on to the next week's agenda?
Yeah.
Next on our agenda, Resolution 2014-191, agreement with parametrics for transportation impact fee program.
A few months ago, you passed an ordinance that allowed us to have transportation impact areas. After discussion with legal counsel, she said that those are extremely difficult to enforce. It would be better to have a transportation impact fee, which was much easier to tie down to SEPA process, et cetera. So we asked parametrics to prepare this scope and budget. This time, we don't want to move it forward because we've got a contract with them through Sumner on another project, and things are not going quite the way we think they should. So I'm not sure we want to continue spending money with the same consultant. So I have a meeting with them tomorrow and Sumner to discuss some issues on Valentin that are sort of going a little bit sideways on us. And then we can come back to this in 2 weeks. In the meantime, if the meeting does not go right tomorrow, what I will do is I will get a scope and budget from another firm who can also do this project. I wanted to bring all this so you know why we're pulling instead of just pulling it, give you a little more background as to why we needed it as well. We do need to have to evaluate if we're going to do traffic impact fees. It's a much safer way of trying to collect money when someone comes with a new project that taxes our infrastructure as opposed to what we had originally proposed, as I said, a few months ago. So, and then the attorney's also recommended some changes a little bit in the scope too, so we'll address those with the other firms.
So if we put something like this in place and say we're in a particular zoning in the city and a business moves in and it significantly increases the traffic to that area and the impacts to the roads, is that a business that's going to be assessed a fee, or is it just new businesses?
It's primarily through the development process. If the business comes in and they have to go through the SEPA process because of the way the business they want to bring in, it is at that point we can say, okay, you're creating this much impact of traffic. We've already calculated what the fees are for that level of increased traffic impact. It's usually so much per vehicle trip, either in the peak hour or per day.
Okay. And so that would be for an existing structure. Is it new business
It's,
for them?
it's
or a
generally
brand
new
structure?
development
Okay.
or redevelopment. And then there's other issues in our code that address the issues of what constitutes development. So it depends on how many permits they need to get. If they have to come in for a conditional use permit for some reason, because what they're proposing is not zoned, immediately permitted, then at that point you would also be able to assess traffic impact fees as well. So there's opportunities to collect those fees, not strictly on new development, redevelopment, and then, like, as I said, a conditional use permit also is another avenue for that. Any other questions on this issue?
All right, next on the agenda, agreement with Macaulay and Associates for updated benefit of LID study for Valentin.
In 2009, Macaulay did a study to evaluate what the potential assessments could be. That's 5 years ago. We need to have this brought up to date now that we're about ready to start construction, so that at the tail end of the project, when construction winds down, we'll be able to have a fair assessment of the property owners. At that time, we pegged the assessment at about 60% of what we believed the improvements would bring in increased value to the property holder. So there should be plenty of room in there. You cannot assess more than what the actual increased value is brought to the property. If one of the larger properties, for example, if these improvements are believed to bring $50,000 worth of increased property value, your assessment can be up to that point. And that's what this study does. It makes sure that as we move forward to the assessment level, as we wind down construction, that we will not be over-assessing and not be challenged. That's where it could be very time-consuming and costly.
Given the change in the economy over the last 5 years, is there any risk that a reevaluation will come out with totally improved values reduced to the point that we don't get the financing we need?
I don't believe so. Even if we don't get all of what we wanted, we should be close. But I don't see it as being a problem. And looking at how real estate values, they took a steep drop. They're now moving back up on the steady rise, whereas before we were pegged at 60%, maybe we'll be at 75% or something now.
Further council questions?
So, in my mind, I know what you're saying, but we've already established an LID in the area for Valentine. We've done the assessment, and all this is just a follow-up to make sure that we're still in line.
The LID has been established. Preliminary assessments were developed. This is moving forward to develop a final assessment.
We're not going to need another one after this.
No, and this will be done in 2 phases. They'll do the first phase, all the data collection, wait until the costs are finalized, and then make the final assessment.
Further council questions? Council pleasure? Vote.